Travis is going to be our first speaker. He's a senior lecturer at La Trobe University who grew up exploring the waters of Western Port. He's a physiologist by trade, but has varied research interests from the feeding behaviour of pelicans to the effects of high-intensity exercise on the contraction of human muscle fibres. That sounds like a perfect recipe for someone to talk about elephantfish. He's also part of the research team that successfully had the bryozoan reef community in Western Port listed as a threatened community under the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act. And that has only happened very, very recently, and it was due to a whole of amazing scientific work, and that could basically be a whole nother presentation, but feel free to ask him questions about it because he does love talking about it. Tonight, however, he's going to talk to us about the elusive elephantfish. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Travis Dutka to share his screen and start to entertain us. Thanks, Travis.
Thank you, Cade, and thank you for the opportunity for me to give a presentation wearing my tracksuit pants. I think it's that kind of weather. A hidden gem. Well, the elephant shark really nails that brief. Not many people interact with elephant, shark, fish, whatever. I'll explain to you what actually is a chimera. So basically it's got a lovely name, actually, the genus. It means it's Calorhynchus, and calo meaning beautiful and rhynchus meaning snout in Greek. So beautiful snout. And the chimera have a whole range of different morphology of their snout. The one that I'll be talking about is the species known as Calorhynchus millii, and it comes into the embayments around the southeastern areas of Australia. So just a little bit of background about them. They separated away from sharks and fish about 400 million years ago. So there's three lineages of fish. There's the cartilaginous sharks and rays, then there's the chimera, and then the bony fish, the true bony fish. They fall in a subclass called holocephali, and the family Chimera, they shared, or the family's Chimaeridae, but a chimera shares traits with both sharks and bony fish, truly bony fish. So they're a bit of a hodgepodge of traits, and I'll go you through some of those quirky ones, and then we'll really get to the really interesting ones in association with their reproductive side. So there's 5 genera in total and about 47 species globally that we know of. There's probably more. They're found typically in the deep sea environment, which is very hard to explore and get a really good grasp on specimens. So the unusual thing about the genus Calorhynchus is that they spend most of their time in the deep sea, but then they traverse into really, really shallow water. So they make this quite an unusual journey, which is not just typified by a long travel, it's a change of habitats. So they go from beautiful, clean, deep sea water to murky, shallow, muddy water. And this occurs in autumn when they come in to lay their eggs. So Calorhynchus millii, the Australian ghost shark, can be found in Australia and New Zealand, but there is other very closely related species, Capensis, which is found in South Africa, and another species, the name escapes me, found off Chile. So they are found in the southern regions, and they typically reside in about 200 metres, but then in autumn they can come up into about 1 metre of water to lay their eggs. So just some of the traits which I'll run through between a shark and a fish. So these traits that the chimera have, one thing is the skin. We look at the skin. So most of you would have felt at some stage some shark skin. So it's smooth if you rub your hand in one direction and really rough if you run it the other way. In fact, shark skin was used as emery boards for polishing nails and really fine grade sandpaper. And if you look at them under a microscope, you can see they've got these jagged teeth. So they're called dermal denticles or skin teeth, okay? The ghost shark doesn't have that. It has skin more aligned to a bony fish. I won't go into too much physiology, but basically Chimera and your sharks and rays are what we call osmoconforming organisms. So basically, when the salinity of the water changes, they change the number of particles in their cells to maintain equilibrium with that environment. So if the salinity increases, the salinity of their internal fluids will increase. So they conform to the change. Whereas the bony fish, they have the completely separate approach, and that's to regulate in spite of environmental changes. So if the water becomes diluted with rain like this, or the seawater is concentrated in rock pools and whatnot, they maintain a constant number of particles in their cells, and they deal with the change instead of going with the flow. Chimeras have a low reproductive rate, which aligns more with the sharks and rays. So over a breeding season, a female ghost shark can lay probably about 20 eggs. But whereas some fish, like a flathead, might liberate, 1 million eggs, which can be fertilized externally. They swim actually through the water in a quite an unusual way. So most fish swim in a serpentine motion where they move the spine and tail beating like that, whereas these guys keep their spine straight, and it's a really tapered body shape that they have, and they have their exaggerated pectoral fins on the side. They flap like a bird, okay? So they use them like wings to fly. They fly through the water. And if you want to have a look at this, you can YouTube elephant shark swimming and you'll see this. Just some other, just moving that bar out of the way. They have one gill opening, which is like a fish. So fish have a gill plate called an opercula, which sits over their gills protecting it. And they have one opening or one slit, and elephant shark have the same. Whereas sharks, this is a 7-gill shark for obvious reasons. You can count them up here, but they have multiple openings for their gills. So that's another trait that sort of distinguishes them from a shark. So they have, chimera males have claspers, just like other sharks and rays. So they're reproductive appendages, which are paired and sit outside the body. And this is one of the first things to identify the sexes of a shark and ray. You can easily see these structures, and that can tell you straight away underwater whether you're looking at a male or a female. But it gets even weirder than this. The elephant sharks have taken sort of sexual dimorphism to an extreme. And if we look at some of the other traits that they have, sorry, for my screen, I have to keep moving the bar out of the way. So if you look in front of the pelvis, you'll see here they've got these pre-pelvic pouches, and sitting within that pouch are what we call pre-pelvic tentaculum. So tentaculum normally means tentacle, but in chimeras it means a reproductive clasper, a supplementary clasping organ. And when it's sitting and swimming, it has it tucked away neatly. But when you actually manipulate that, it comes out of that pouch, and you see this weird and wonderful structure, and it's got these gripping pads which they use to hold onto the female during a coitus. Not only do they have those weird structures, they have a weird protuberance that sits on top of the forehead, and these are called and I'll show you, it's reseated here to make it streamlined for swimming, but when it needs to, it can actually pull that out and use that as a gripping tool to latch onto the female. So this is called a frontal tentaculum or frontal teeth. And if you can look at the actual higher resolution, you can see all of these points, little spikes. So it's really like a little club which it can use and grab hold of a leading edge of a female's pectoral fin or her dorsal spine. So these sharks have a spine sitting on top of their back. And when breeding season comes about in autumn, usually between the end of or middle of March through to the early parts of May, the longer the breeding season goes, the more scarred you see on the female. So this is a female now who's been mated with or attempted to be mated with, and you can see all these gouge marks along her body where the male has tried to grab hold of her. And we know that these are not injuries from any other cause, because if you look in these little yellow boxes that I've got circled here, you can see they fit that club-like structure on the head of the male. So what I think happens is these long scratches are caused when it tries to grab hold of, but she either wriggles away or he slides down, and that causes these longer scratches. So very little is known about the breeding behaviour of the Calorhynchus, the actual act of mating, because it's usually in murky water and people just don't see it. So we're trying to understand in our laboratory. So I've combined my efforts with the neuroecology lab at La Trobe Uni, and together with Sean Collin, we co-supervise some PhD students, and we've got a talented one called Hope Robin, who's working on the sensory modalities of these species of Chimera. Nothing is known about the sensing abilities of these and how they cope with changes in environmental conditions, how it goes from clean water to dirty water. How does it rely on its vision and then switch to some other cues? There's no understanding of how well they smell, how well they see, or how well they hear. So here she's dissected painstakingly out an intact brain of an elephant shark, and you can just see how elaborate the structures are. I'm not going to go into all of these different parts of the brain. That could be a whole presentation in itself, but I just want you to appreciate that they're not just a simple P-shaped brain with not much going on. They've actually got a highly developed brain, like most vertebrates, and all these regions relate to a particular sense. But they're quite interesting, and in the next year or two, we should have some lovely answers in the behaviour and the development of the senses in these animals. So they're rarely seen by divers and snorkelers, partly because 10 months of the year they're not here, and the 2 months that they are here, they're in murky water. So, and typically they use these areas of murkiness to lay their eggs into the sediment, and you can find these guys in the upper reaches of Anderson's Inlet, Western Port, to the east side of Western Port in particular, and to places like the top of the Barwon River as well. So for 2 months of the year, they come in and they reside in poor visibility water. But if you really wanted to spot one in the wild, I'd suggest you go at high tide when the clean oceanic water pushes into areas of the eastern side of Western Port, around Grantville and Lang Lang, and just snorkel over the flats in about 2 to 3 metres of water, and don't kick vigorously, and just maybe do a drift dive or snorkel with the tide, so you can actually not startle them, and that's probably your best bet at seeing them. So they come into these regions and they lay pairs of eggs. So each time the female lays, she lays 2 eggs in soft sediment, and she can lay up to 20 per season. We don't know whether she makes the same trip every year or whether there's a hiatus of about 5 years or so, like some other sharks can do. And then usually in migratory animals, it's sometimes a challenge to do it every year. So we don't really know too accurately about the fecundity of these animals. And these photos are courteous of by Rudy Curto. If you've into your fish identification and you've looked at any fish book, chances are the photos were taken by Rudy. He's ubiquitous in the Australian dive world and snorkeling world. So, as I was just saying, most people who encounter them are fishermen, and they can actually target them in these areas. What I think, so in the 80s and 90s, there was lots and lots of elephant shark caught all around the entire bay. They imposed bag limits to reduce the catch down from 5 down to 3 down to 1. But I think in most of these areas where people are familiar with, they no longer catch elephant shark. And alarm bells went off, and we thought that perhaps there's fewer animals around. But the fishing status is stable, and the numbers being caught out in the ocean are seemingly unchanging. And I think what's happening is, in the past, as the seagrasses recovered in Western Port, the Zostra, there's less and less area for these animals to lay their eggs. They need bare sediment. So if the Zostra is doing well and recovering across the bay, they're being forced to utilise the remaining small patches. So I think there's a contraction of the area that they use, and the contraction's not in their numbers. So I think their numbers are probably stable. They're just utilising different regions now. So if you really want to encounter these guys, you probably need to go to the eastern side of Western Port. Now, just a quick close-up of their face. You can see they've got these weird crushing teeth, and they use these to break the hard bodies of crustacea and bivalves. They eat mud arcs and whatnot. They have lots of electroreceptors on these snouts, and the snout morphology changes from species to species depending on the evolution of its interaction with its preferred prey. Another unusual trait that they have is they have their nostrils inside their jaw, so the nostrils go through the jaw, which is quite unusual. This is just a picture of some of their preferred food. So they come in and they graze in the shallow sediments looking for ghost shrimp, and by little bivalves, they crush them up with those strong crab and shellfish designed jaws for crushing. So this is just a picture of taken from April this year at Lang Lang. We call it a boat ramp, but it's just a slab of concrete in the mud. It's getting a bit of an upgrade, but it's not much. So this is a very expansive, shallow, warm, bare sediment area, perfect for their eggs and the developing embryo, because the shallow water with less current actually has probably a higher temperature to it. So it's probably conducive to developing embryo. And here's some, so fishermen here are either targeting gummy shark or elephant shark at that time of the year. And they do so with kayaks because they can access the shallow water. So there's not many people who actually get to interact with one in the wild unless you're a fisherman targeting them in a specific area. So that's all I want to say, and I'll hand over now. Back. I'll stop sharing, maybe.
Thanks, Trav. That was fascinating, and we've actually got a question here from Dolphin Dave Donnelly, who doesn't know how to use the Q&A function. But his question is, how do the gill openings of the elephantfish differ from the spiracle of a ray?
So the spiracle of a ray is part of, because they're a sedentary animal who are sitting static.
Actually, can you tell us what a spiracle is? Because some people may.
Okay, it's an opening. It looks like an ear, but it's not. It's just a big hole. If you swim over a ray or like a fiddler ray, banjo shark, or any skate ray, you'll see they've got these large openings behind their head, and they're called a spiracle, or it's a buccal pump where they draw water in, okay, under pressure. So because their gills are on the underside, and if they're sitting sedentary on the bottom, they're not pushing water over their gills. So when they're sitting idle on the bottom, they use these buccal pumps to suck water in and push it over the. So these guys don't do that. They've got their opening to the side and they're drawing in water through the mouth and poking it out through that opening. So that's the difference between a buccal pump, or spherical is the opening, but all taken in its entirety, it's a buccal pump.
So I've got a quick question here from someone who might have missed it, and I wanted to just add to it. It's like, so what are the 2 months, and is this at the top of the temperature in the bays, or is it sort of as it's starting to dip off?
Yeah, it's starting to dip off, but it is. They come in maybe the end of February and leave by sort of mid-May. But each individual is usually only in there for no more than sort of 3 months, but typically about 2 months, and it does coincide with warm water. So,
good tip for those wanting to find it. So
yeah, I would say middle of April, if you're looking to swim with one, pick a high tide, shallow water, either Grantville or Lang Lang, when you got clean visibility that time of year on a high tide. Yeah.
And so what you're telling us that having it on the fish count slate is pretty much irrelevant because no one's going to find it in November or December. So
unless they find a juvenile that's
okay,
hatched and it's residing in the bay.
What I wanted to know is this: you talk about the soft sediment. So soft sediment is a very catch-all phrase for sediments in general. Is there, like, do we know, is it a particular sort of like a clay, a sediment, a sandy, like, do they lay it on a certain thing? And then, often most people's interaction is with the egg case itself. Is that just a shark that's laid it in the wrong spot, or is it usually after the juveniles have hatched?
Well, a bit of both. I think once the juvenile is hatched and erupted out, it becomes light and dry, and then probably makes it more likely to be disturbed by waves and whatnot and current. But also, if there is a storm activity, you can find viable egg cases on, and same is true with Port Jackson shark and fiddler rays and a lot of other rays and things. They can be viable, but a storm surge might have pushed them up into the shallows or up on the beach. So, yeah, don't take them home. Just have a look and see. You can actually candle them. It's what the technique. If you shine a light through, you can probably see if it's got a viable embryo in it, and then you can put it actually back. And in terms of the sediment, that side of the bay all changed dramatically about 100 years ago when they drained the Kururup swamp to make it agricultural land. So I think the sediment load is probably clay and soil that's washed down, and also from erosion from that side of the bay. Whenever there's a storm activity pounding into the banks, it erodes and it deposits and spreads it down. You're on mute, Kate.
I've got a kid that's just gone to the toilet, so I didn't want everyone to hear that. You can use the soap bud, it's fine. We've had a power blackout. Yes, we can get a new one. We've had a power blackout. So Mike is hoping that it's going to come back in 5 minutes or so. We've also lost Nicole, so I have a feeling that it may be widespread. We have most attendees. Nicole, back, and now she's gone, so Nicole is still here. So I've actually just got a couple of questions, and if anyone's got questions for Trav, please just throw them in there while we're going. So you've answered my one about sediment, and now you're talking about like the reproductive behavior and not really knowing much about them. Are they a species that doesn't keep well in aquarium settings? Like, is that something that's been tried?
They were for a while, and Dave Donnelly probably can speak more to this. They were a feature of the Melbourne Aquarium for a few years. I'm not entirely sure as to why that disappeared. I don't think they do very well in captivity, and I think certainly they need probably tanks which don't have corners and whatnot, in if it's a circular shape, that probably makes it easier for them. But again, we don't know much, if anything, about their sensory capacities, what irritates them, what not, how sensitive they are to noise, how sensitive they are to, electrical discharge. There's lots of reasons why they might not keep very well in captivity. So we'll hopefully over the years we'll understand a bit more about their physiology and how that influences their behaviour.
Yeah, don't worry, we'll be inviting you back. There's been a lot of good comments and people sort of saying keen to go exploring now. So it'll be interesting to see the snorkelers with the kayak fishermen.